Well, firstly, I mean, the most basic point is you can't stop capitalists speculating so long as they're still in control of society's means of production, even in the most heavily regulated environment. And you take even Venezuela, for example, where the state is totally against the capitalist control of the economy, but in the sections that they do still control, like food production, or most of it in Venezuela, they're able to hoard food and get the price to go up and speculate. Like, if they control any crucial commodity, whether it's food, oil, anything you actually need, then they can make the price of that go absolutely through the roof by, you know, withdrawing it from the market. It's one form of speculation. Even in Cuba, I mean, Fidel called them making an attack on the republic, was his reference to really small farmers, like when they introduced or reintroduced some more private farming after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 90s. So you had, you know, these tiny private enterprises who controlled a bit of food, and they would hoard it and speculate and send the price, you know, and sort of divert the whole economic resources to themselves just because they had control of food. I mean, that was not control of the whole thing, but, you know, they could like extort people basically quite a lot. So, and that was in Cuba. Now, of course, the 5,000 multinational corporations who run the planet have a lot more power than sort of small private agricultural concerns in Cuba, and their power of speculation is immensely stronger. And you think about, I mean, any commodity that can be purchased privately can be speculated on. You think of land, you know, if you're allowed to purchase it, then you can hold on to it and wait for the price to go up or down. I mean, so it's unthinkable to have capitalism to have private ownership of private property without speculation. Yeah, I mean, so the speculations become increasingly important in the current capitalist economy. As the Egyptian economist Samir Amin explains, the focus is now on the struggle between the oligopolies, that is the multinational corporations, to redistribute profits. This redistribution of profits among them, actually, I'll just say before that, I mean, this is the point about the financialisation of the economy and speculation is that it is the transition from productive capital to the struggle between capitalist firms to take more of the existing value for themselves. It's essentially an intensification of competition, and this is what Samir Amin explains. He says the focus is now on the struggle between the oligopolies to redistribute the profits. This redistribution of profits among them is done through financial investments. Each one of them tries to widen its sphere of financial investment in order to redistribute profits in its own favour. These profits are of another nature. They are monopoly rents, and this is what is being called financialisation. Where's my point end? Yeah, I think that's... Yeah, okay, so that's the end quote. It's called financialisation. And deregulation is essential in this struggle by the oligopolies. Oh, still quoting him. He says, deregulation is essential in this struggle by the oligopolies for more profits through financialisation. And deregulation is not being fundamentally questioned, as he points out, as one can see from the new rules articulated in November 15, 2008 by the G20 communique, which didn't change anything. You know, they might talk a bit about reining in speculation, but they have taken no measures to do it at all. Okay, so in concluding, what about today's outlook? I mean, what is the sort of, you know, we can't make any prediction, but what are we experiencing at the moment? What is happening today on Wall Street and in Minneapolis and Guangzhou, where more than 1 million workers have been made unemployed, and in fact across the whole globe, is more than a bigger than normal recession. It is in fact the collapse of a whole regime of capital accumulation built up since the 1970s. The whole neoliberal model, if you like, has collapsed. that regime was itself a response to the collapse of the previous Keynesian regime of capital accumulation, or the previous model of capitalist functioning or profitability. So in this sense, what we're experiencing is a real crisis, and there's no obvious way forward for capitalist accumulation. I mean, as we know, what they've come up with so far is the state subsidising them in the meantime. The emergence of microelectronics since the late 1960s has begun to create the basis for a new technological revolution. Because we said earlier that was the introduction of semi-automatic production after World War II that created a 3-decade boom. However, the replacement of semi-automated production with fully automated production, that is the next logical step in technological development, that is robotisation of production, is obviously not possible under capitalism. It's only possible when we change the social relations of production, because robots don't buy goods and services or create values. In the meantime, however, the world's ruling classes have already demonstrated they have no alternative policy for how to manage the current crisis, how to they have no alternative model of profitability that they're putting forward. And this can be seen by their policies, by their bailout packages, which are essentially aimed at restoring the status quo. And, I mean, whether the capitalist states are in a position to do that, to finance a stabilisation, even in the short term, of the current regime of capitalist accumulation, i.e. whether their bailout packages will work, I mean, that's a whole another question. Nobody really knows the answer to that. On February 9, Bloomberg reported, quote, the stimulus package the US Congress is completing would raise the government's extra spending to $9.7 trillion. And they pointed out this is enough to pay off more than 90% of the nation's mortgages in the US. It's also the same equivalent figure. It's enough to send a cheque to every man, woman and child in the world, they say, of $1,430 US. Now that would obviously be a significant stimulation in production, but they're not doing that with the money. They're not sending it to people across the world who would then obviously create a bit of demand for goods and services. I mean, you can imagine if a lot of workers and farmers in the third world with $1,000 US, they would want some manufactured, use that for some manufactured, productive goods. But no, they're handing it out to the financial oligopolies, as Samir Amin calls them. And nobody seems to know where it's going. And this is my favourite quote, actually. This is Senator Byron Dorgan, a North Dakota Democrat, said on the US Senate floor on February 3, quote, we've seen money go out the back door of this government unlike any time in the history of our country. Still quoting, nobody knows what went out of the Federal Reserve Board, to whom, and for what purpose. How much for the federal FDIC, how much for the FDIC, to the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, how much for TARP, when, why. I mean, this is a senator in the Democrats, the current administration. Now, what we do know is the money will have to be paid back, or the finance system will collapse. That's the reality of capitalist financial logic. And given the crisis of capitalist profitability, it's not hard to guess who will have to pay the money back. Working people will have to pay it back, because the capitalists are obviously having trouble turning a profit as it is. If they don't turn a profit, then we will see the collapse of capitalism. You can't have capitalism without profits. 3 governments in Europe have fallen already because of the economic crisis, in Belgium, Latvia and Iceland. And it's also clear that the US economy is not doing the worst in this crisis. The Philippines, for example, has seen its exports fall by 40% over I don't know how many months that is. All over the world, working people are sick of being told for the last 20, 30 years, told they need to cut back their own living standards so that the economy can function, supposedly in everybody's benefit.